Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also add that sanctions only work when they're actually properly enforced. And as we can see, this administration has done nothing to continue to enforce the sanction against Iran, which is why they have more petroleum export at this time than they ever had throughout their history, which is actually helping to funnel into the funding of other terrorist organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, Houthis. So sanctions only work when they're actually being enforced. I want to go back to something that you had stated a few moments ago, Ms. Kindler, and I'm not trying to pick on you on this one, but I'm just curious. You know, you say, and I'm quoting you, we are concerned with human rights and national security, yet the very country who poses the greatest threat to us from a national security perspective, the very country which commits tremendous amounts of human rights, and I would even wager to say genocide, is actually the Chinese government themselves. And yet we're actually scared under the Biden administration to call them adversaries. We still try and refer to them as competitors because we don't want to upset the great ruler Xi. That's the realities here. You want to talk about genocide and human rights violations? Chinese government. And you try to distinguish between the two from the PRC to the CCP, but the same guy who heads both is the same guy. So I think it's hard to ignore that. Everyone is so nervous about the ideas of decoupling away from them because they realize that America has not done themselves any favors by continuing to ingratiate themselves with adversarial reliance on our supply chain mechanism. And meanwhile, we'll sit here and say, we care about national security, we care about human rights, but then go and spend and build the economy of a dictator and a nation who actually violates both. I'm sorry, I've got a big issue with that. So I want to go back to IFS because, again, I don't feel that we're actually hitting on this right. Because IFS and the National Narcotics Laboratory are co-located, the Chinese government has repeatedly and aggressively claimed that both entities were on the entity list, despite multiple clarifications, by the way, from the U.S. government that this wasn't true. To the best of your understanding, did the Chinese government condition their re-engagement with the U.S. on counter-narcotics efforts on IFS being removed from the entity list?
Congressman, if I may, no Commerce Department in history has been more aggressive towards China and export controls than this.
I'd agree under the Trump administration, but not now. Because I've watched actually the opposite. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and I'm fine that you got back onto this topic because I'm all for it, they've been geopolitically aligned for decades, and we've ignored it. That's why Russia and China both modified their constitution so they can stay in power forever, so they can actually go after the U.S. dollar as the global currency. The whole idea was to focus on Western Hemisphere attacks on economics and resource and supply chain base. But yet when we support their allies, we in turn indirectly support them as well, which is why I brought up Iran earlier, which is why I bring up the marriage of convenience of Russia with the Chavez of Venezuela or Pedro in Colombia, or the economic coercion that goes on in Panama and Honduras that actually allows them to control the taxation and tariffs of the Panama Canal, or the Belt and Road Initiative expansion that takes over Eurasian expansion, Africa, Oceania, so they control Western Hemisphere supply chain through the Red Sea, Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Horn of Africa, the Persian Gulf. Let's go on and on with this. No, the Biden administration has not been more aggressive against China. They've actually been weaker. And I think that when you look at exportation, which is simple data numbers, it speaks to that and its inevitability. That we are not becoming a nation which is decoupling from adversaries, we're actually becoming more reliant upon, especially as we attack natural gas and our own ability to provide energy, which, by the way, I would argue is truly the global currency as energy output. So I disagree with your assertion there. And I think it's, just look at the numbers, look at the figures on this. And I think that everyone can actually go with this. But my question goes back to it. Did the Chinese government condition their re-engagement of U.S. counter-narcotic efforts on IFS being removed from the entity list?
Congressman, as I believe my colleague noted, that we were of the clear understanding that this was an impediment to their cooperation on the fentanyl precursors.
So did the Chinese then say, if you don't remove IFS, or if you, I guess if I should say, if IFS is removed, that would have a implication on this re-engagement?
Congressman, all I can tell you is that it was clear to us that removal of this entity from the entity list would lead to cooperation on fentanyl precursors, and that is a national security
priority. So we allow China
priority
to now
of the
drive
United States.
what goes on and off our entity list based on what type of engagement they will or will not have with us?
The decision of who to remove from the entity list is made by the Departments of Defense, Commerce, Energy, and State unanimously.
You know, that's funny to me. I mean, this would be the equivalent, and I just saw that. So if, for example, China automatically says that we're going to support you in climate change, does that mean that we just drop Huawei as well? I mean, this is the dangerous precedence that we set when we start engaging these ways where foreign entities say, we won't engage with you unless you do X. And we go ahead and acquiesce to these each time. And my colleague can talk about the fact that I utilize the term acquiesce, but when we do that, I'm going to call it for what it is. So I'm sorry, but I didn't realize that we were actually serving the People's Republic of China as opposed to the United States and the people who are citizens here and what the best interests are here. But if you want to talk about human rights and national security, then start looking at the decoupling away from China in its entirety. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Moran.